Now we're going to look at photosynthesis in detail. So we looked at the big picture. We looked at the equation of what comes into photosynthesis, what goes out. Now we're going to look briefly at how those materials are going to be used in the two parts of photosynthesis. So we're going to look at first the photo part, which is the first part. So the photo reactions, we're not going to get into the nitty-gritty details. So if you look in your textbook, there's more detail there than what we're going to go over here. But here's generally what's happening. Right? So mentioned in a previous lecture, we've got the thylakoids, right? So the pancakes in the chloroplasts. So that's where the photo reactions are going to happen. Now photo, like photograph, photo means light. So the photo reactions are often referred to as the light dependent reactions. They require light in order to occur. And so they are going to use the sunlight, so the light, and they're going to use the water out of our big equation. So the sunlight and the water are going to be used in those thylakoids. This is also where our chlorophyll is. So the chlorophyll is going to be the pigment that's going to capture that light. Now remember, they're not going to capture all of the different spectrums of that light, but they're going to capture most of it. And through the process of using that sunlight and the water, the chlorophyll is going to capture the sunlight and it's going to turn it into these energy storing molecules. We've met this one before, ATP. So remember, ATP is that rechargeable battery. Well, NADPH is another type of rechargeable battery. It works the same way. It also carries hydrogens, which are electrons. So it's going to help carry electrons and then these hydrogen ions around, because the hydrogens attract electrons, which are important in the inner workings of this whole process. Like I said, we're not going to get into the nitty-gritty details, but these guys are important for the next step. So you're going to take that sunlight and water, feed it into these thylakoids. The chlorophyll is going to capture that sunlight and help convert it into these energy molecules, these batteries. And in the process, the plant ends up making oxygen. So this is like the byproduct, the leftover of the process of making these energy molecules. So that oxygen, pretty much most of it's going to just leave the plant because it makes more of it than it would need to use for anything else. And that is, for our purposes, the photo part of the photo reaction. If you're really interested, you can take a look in your book, and there are some videos out there about more of the details of what's going on in here. But for our purpose, that's the photo reaction. So what do we get from the photo reaction? We get those ATP and NADPH, so those energy molecules, and we get the oxygen left over. We're not worried about the oxygen because we need the ATP and NADPH for the next step. So the next part of photosynthesis is the synthesis part. And what does synthesis mean? Synthesis means to make, to synthesize, to put together. And so the photo part, that's going to be using light. The synthesis part is where we're going to put stuff together. And so this is where we're going to take that captured energy from the sunlight and we're going to make food from it in the plant. Okay? So this part is called the Calvin cycle. The Calvin cycle is a series of chemical reactions. So you can see we just have the Calvin cycle. Again, this is more detailed, but for our purposes, we're not going to go into the heavy detail. If you want to see more information, again, it is in your textbook. This cycle is going to happen in the stroma. So the photo part happened in the thylakoids right here, so that these molecules, the ATP and NADPH, would be out here in the stroma, ready to go. And it's going to use enzymes. Remember, enzymes are those guys that put stuff together and take stuff apart. Well, we're going to use those enzymes to do that, to take molecules together, take molecules apart and put them back together in this cycle. So the enzymes are going to go round and round and round and round in here. And we're going to use these energy molecules to power that. So they're going to help power that cycle to take carbon dioxide and rearrange it to make our sugars. Okay, so that's what this Calvin cycle is going to do. It's going to take the energy molecules from the photo part, the carbon dioxide that the plant pulled in from outside, feed it into the Calvin cycle with those enzymes, rearrange the carbon dioxides. So it's going to take 6 of them, right? 6 carbon dioxides, and rearrange them and make them into a sugar. Okay, so it's going to take several times of going through this cycle to make it work, but eventually you get a sugar. And that's photosynthesis. Like I said, if you are more interested in more detail, you can take a look at your textbook. But for what we're doing, that is the level that you need to know. All right. Now, thing is that you probably are aware that plants don't all grow in the same sort of conditions. And so one of the things looking forward with, things like climate change and so forth, we're already running into some food scarcity in different parts of the world, and that's mainly because of things like water issues. Rain patterns are changing and so forth. And one of the things that we can do is use plants that are adapted to low water conditions. So the thing is that some plants already thrive in hot, dry conditions. So what are some examples of plants that you know that grow in hot, dry conditions? My guess is you probably said something like a cactus, right? And yeah, cacti already grow in hot, dry conditions, and they need an adaptation to reduce their water loss, right? Because in hot, dry conditions, that water evaporates. And when do plants use water? We just found out they use water during the photo part of photosynthesis. They use water for other things, but that's the main thing they use it for. They need it to be able to make that food, to be able to build parts of the plant. So, how do they lose water? Because most people are like, wait, they're plants, they don't sweat. The thing is that plants do sweat. I know that sounds so weird, but these little weird mouth things are what they use to actually get their carbon dioxide and let their oxygen out. Okay? So these are their openings, their pores for gas exchange. So this is an up-close picture of the underside of a leaf. And these are the stomata, or stoma. I know. Stoma and stroma. Yeah, I know. Because you've got the stroma in your chloroplast, and you've got stomata for these guys. I don't know. But you've got these stoma, these openings, and we've got pictures here of the stoma being open and the stoma being closed. The stoma will be open when it's not dry and hot, right? And then the stoma will close when the plant detects that it is going to be dry or hot. Because one of the things that escapes out of these stoma, these openings, is water. Because water will evaporate when the air is dry. So then the question is, if these are closed because it's dry and hot, how is the plant going to get its carbon dioxide when these are shut? Because that's the only way they can get it. They have to have these open in order to get carbon dioxide. Well, the plants like cacti and other plants have become adapted to these hotter, drier conditions by changing the way they do photosynthesis. So that's what we're going to take a quick look at. So what I just showed you as far as photosynthesis is what we call C3 photosynthesis. So this is what most of the plants you're familiar with do. So they take carbon dioxide in through their open stomata, they do the Calvin cycle, they make sugar. And they can do this because, like, for example, here in Ohio, there's enough water available either through the soil or it's humid enough that they're not going to evaporate a lot of their water. So it's not a problem, right? And so the advantage for this is it's energy efficient, and the downside is that they're going to lose water if they're in a hot climate. But for most plants that do this, that's not a problem because there's enough water around. However, if a plant has evolved in a hot, dry climate, it may have evolved one of these other types of photosynthesis. And this is where we're looking at for some of our food plants. So C4 photosynthesis, it's 4 because it's taken an extra step. They bring in carbon dioxide through the stomata, but they keep them partially closed. So you can see the difference. These are full open, these are partially closed. And what they've done is spent some ATP, you can see they've spent some energy to make what's basically carbon sticky tape. So I don't know if you're familiar with fly paper, you know, the paper that people hang up in the corner of their house to catch flies and insects, but it's sticky tape made specifically to catch any carbon dioxide that comes in. And so that way they can be really efficient at catching carbon dioxide. So that extra energy spent on making that sticky tape allows them to keep doing the Calvin cycle and making their sugar. Upside, they don't lose much water because they're keeping these stoma or stomata closed most of the time, so they lose very little water. Downside, yeah, they're going to need to spend more energy. Plants that you would be familiar with that do this, things like corn and grasses. So think about like the grasses that you see in National Geographic where like the zebras and stuff are running, right? This is why your grass in your lawn turns brown in the summer, but then perks back up as soon as it gets water, right? So there are C4 plants around the world. The last type of photosynthesis is what we call CAM photosynthesis. And these are the plants that live in very hot, dry areas generally. What they do is they split up their carbon dioxide gathering and the Calvin cycle. So at night, they are going to open their stomata. They'll open them wide. They're going to do the same carbon sticky tape trick. So they're going to spend energy, ATP, and they'll do that all night long. So they will keep those stomata open at night and use that sticky tape trick to capture the carbon. Why would this make sense to do for something that lives in a very hot, dry climate? My guess is you probably said something along the lines of, in places where it's hot and dry, it's cooler at night, and so they won't lose as much water. And that's exactly what happens. So it's not as hot at night, so they'll lose not quite as much water as they would if they had it open during the day, right? Then when the sun comes up, those stomata close shut. So no carbon dioxide or water or oxygen goes anywhere. They do all of that at night. But because they've been gathering carbon all night, they can do the Calvin cycle during the day while the photo part of photosynthesis goes on and can give them the energy they need to make their sugars, right? Big downside to this, it requires more energy. In fact, it requires even more energy than C4 because they can't gather as much carbon during the night as C4s could do. And so the growth is incredibly slow. And the upside is they do, minimize their water loss in these really hot climates, but their growth is really slow. I don't know if anybody's ever tried to grow a cactus, but they grow incredibly slowly. And so, that's just the kind of exchange that they make. And so you can actually see the distribution of photosynthesis for C3 and C4 plants. And if you look, C4 plants are going to be more common in areas that are hotter and drier, right? So, half of Australia is covered in C4 plants versus C3 plants. And that makes sense because like half of Australia is a desert. And same thing, we've got everything near the equator pretty much is going to be C4 plants because we've got hotter climates and in a lot of these areas, drier climates, the exception being like right here and right here, those are tropical rainforests. So that's the end of photosynthesis. Up next will be cellular respiration.